My name is James Michael Bowers, and I'm the Northeast City Council rep. This is our Northeast Citizens Meeting, which we hold every third Thursday of the month from 5:30 to 6:30. Every month we bring a guest on to talk about issues that are facing Lincoln and to talk about how the city can best serve folks in Northeast Lincoln and for the rest of the city. Today we have our good friend, Councilwoman Sandra Washington. Councilwoman Washington is an at-large member, and she was appointed to the council about almost 2 years ago, right? Almost 2 years ago. She's been working hard for our city ever since she was appointed, and we brought her in today so she can talk a little bit about things that are going on in the city and to have a discussion about things from housing, what our new normal is going to be after the pandemic, and some really great initiatives that Councilwoman Washington has launched. So with that being said, Councilwoman Washington, you want to do an introduction to yourself? I know that you were at a Northeast Citizens meeting, and you've always been a friend to coming to these meetings, where you introduced yourself after you were first on the council. But do you want to do an introduction for folks who might just be tuning in for the first time?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Councilman Bowers. Yeah, it's like when I was appointed in June of 2019, I think my very first neighborhood meeting was to come to the Northeast Citizens meeting. I felt very welcome there. It was great. Thanks so much for inviting me. As Councilman Bowers has said, I'm an appointed member of City Council. I've been on council since June of 2019. I was formerly on the Lincoln-Lancaster Planning Commission, where I served there as a planning commissioner for 3 years. And prior to that, my civic involvement in Lincoln has primarily been in conservation, the out of doors, and trails and things like that. I serve the board of directors for the Nebraska Trails Foundation. I'm very involved in the Prairie Corridor that goes from Pioneers Park all the way down to Spring Creek Prairie outside of Denton. And I served a couple of terms on the Parks and Rec Advisory Board. My professional career was with the National Park Service, and the office was in Omaha, so I was a commuter. I drove every day back and forth to Omaha, but I loved my career with the National Park Service. I did so many interesting things, but after 25 years, I knew I needed to put the brakes on and make a different decision, and that was to come home and be a stay-at-home parent. That was my primary focus. So that's what I'm doing. Besides council, I have a teenager who's a freshman in high school. And, you know, we're negotiating this high school thing. So, like many of you, you know, I've got a kid in LPS, and we're getting through. And she's making a decision right now about full-time high school. So we'll see. But yeah, that's who I am. And while I've been here on City Council, I've had a chance to get involved in a lot of different things. And I think what I really like the most, if we can be informal, can I call you James?
Yeah, absolutely,
okay.
absolutely.
All right, thanks. Behind the scenes, we talk to each other by first names. But, you know, since I've been involved, James, on City Council, I've gotten involved in a lot of different things. And housing seems to be the issue of the day for me. I know that as a planning commissioner, I spend a lot of time looking at developments and the process of developers applying for plats and special use permits or CUPs. And, you know, I realize there's a lot of development happening primarily on the edge, and the comprehensive plan has said affordable housing is a really big need in our community. And some of the creative ways of getting affordable housing put back into Lincoln is in infill development, which means smaller developments on the, you know, at the center of town or in some pockets of town. And that's challenging on so many fronts. I think the coordinated action plan that we just passed at council is a really good step. It sort of sets a set of goals, some direction, and says this is important for our community. And then there's lots of different ways to go about it. As a tier off of that, we're working on an implementation plan for that action plan. And I get to chair that with Mark Hansen of Westgate Bank. And the two of us have really dug in on what will it take for Lincoln to actually meet the mayor's goal of 5,000 new affordable housing units in the next 10 years, which 5,000 is a huge number, and even if you break it down by 10 years, 500 a year is really quite a lot of units. But I think that there's a way to get there, and so we're working on that implementation plan right now with a wonderful group of folks from south of downtown, a number of banks, Lincoln Housing Authority, the Community Foundation, it's just, NeighborWorks, I can't not mention NeighborWorks. So really a lot of organizations coming together to talk about how do we actually get this done. And I'm looking forward to being able to roll that out in the next 60 or 70 days.
Very cool, very cool.
Yeah.
Do you find that your planning background has helped inform you as you work on housing in our city?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad that I had some background in planning before I stepped into these positions. I really enjoy looking at big pictures and imagining what the future could be. And that doesn't mean that planners have all the ideas or the best ideas, but what I like is that this is like a puzzle. And when you come up with an idea, we want our community to be, of course we want it to be strong, resilient, vibrant. We want people to feel safe in their neighborhoods. But then you say, how does it happen? You know, how do you make that happen on paper and then in actuality? And so I like looking at big pictures. I like piecing together everything from infrastructure and growth boundaries and economics, and then the social things and services, and how does it all sort of work together and you create what you want. And that's an issue right now as people talk about, in fact, Lincoln is growing. Lincoln has grown a lot in the 30 years that I've lived here. I think when I moved here, Lincoln was 100, at least the sign said, 191,638 or something like that.
Down to the number, you got
I know,
it
was just a sign that I saw every time when I drove out of Lincoln and came back to Lincoln every day. I saw this, population. And not that that was exactly it, but that was the population on the sign. And we're now a community of about 279,000, 280,000 people. That's a lot of growth in 30 years, and I don't see it slowing down because I think we're an attractive community for people to raise their families, for businesses. Every time I hear of a business that has transplanted themselves from someplace on the coast to Lincoln, I am just thrilled and amazed. And frankly, I'm waiting for more of my friends on the coast to realize that Lincoln is great and move here. But I think there's a lot of push right now for how big we can be, and let's push the boundary just a little bit more. And I know we've still got growth area inside the Tier 1 and Tier 2, but it's time now to really look at how do we push those out, and the comprehensive plan that we're working on right now is doing that. Developers, of course, are looking for how do we get less expensive land in so that, so that lots are less expensive, so their costs go down. But I think everyone's looking for how do I find a house that's affordable for me.
Why is housing important, right? Like, why is housing important for our city and for our neighbors who live here?
Gosh, that's a great question, and it's a basic one. I mean, everybody needs decent housing. Without decent housing, you don't have a place to feel secure in, and so it's awfully hard to go to the next thing if you don't have a place to live, or a secure place, or a safe and healthy place to live. Then all your energy, all your money is spent trying to just keep that up. And then you're not spending your time, your energy on other things. I mean, I think housing is critical, food is critical, jobs are critical. And right now there's a lack of housing in that price point that people can afford who are working the kinds of jobs we have here in Lincoln for the pay that we have. We have a lot of jobs in the service industry. We also have jobs in government and the university, but we have a lot of jobs in the service industry, and those are low-paying jobs. I'm not putting down the people who are paying the people to do this, but those folks need housing too. And that housing in that price range that someone who is making $35,000 a year, that's the hard part, or less. I mean, there are certainly families who don't make $35,000 a year. I mean, that's poverty. But, they need housing too. And if we can make sure we have that kind of stock here, then people can think about something else. And maybe they're going to think about jobs, and they can think about furthering their education. And I think that this pandemic has created situations for us to really rethink some of the systems we have in place right now and whether or not they're working for everyone. And then to think about how we could react in a different way. How can we be prepared the next time we have some disaster? And I'm knock on wood, it's not going to be another pandemic. But, we could have a series of tornadoes, or even, heck, we could have another winter storm like we had a couple of weeks ago. And wouldn't it be great if every home in Lincoln had internet that you could rely on? Sure, steady, connected internet, so that no matter what, no matter whether or not you made $25,000 a year or you made $250,000 a year, you had good internet, because that's how we're going to stay connected with each other. So many services come that way. So I think that's important. I'd like to see us figure out how to bring everybody into that kind of connection and access.
One of the things I've really appreciated about you is when, over the past 2 years, because you mentioned systems not working for everyone, and I know even from the dais you've talked about discrepancies even in like Northeast Lincoln and as it relates to health and whatnot. So I've always really appreciated the fact that you recognize that it's not the same in every pocket of the city, and that things are different in different areas of the city. Do you think that Lincoln will reach its goal of having enough housing at some point, or affordable housing at some point?
I think so. I do think so. I think that in order to get there, some mindsets have to shift just a smidge. When I look at the south of downtown redevelopment plan, I get pretty excited about the kinds of things they're suggesting could happen. Now, south of downtown is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Lincoln, and their lots, when the city was laid out, weren't very wide. And it worked okay, right? It worked well for Lincoln at that point. As we've grown up and we've gotten much more into zoning and creating the standards for that, to some degree we have put suburban zoning rules on central core city neighborhoods. And where neighborhoods didn't used to have a standard of a 50-foot wide lot, or with all the setbacks on the sides, that's fine in further out where there's a little bit more land. But in the heart of Lincoln, I think we need to be willing to have lots that are more narrow with narrower side backs. Row houses, townhomes, the kind of apartment buildings in just south of here, where the buildings are fairly close together. The apartments have great ceilings. I mean, they're wonderful buildings. It feels like those apartments were built for homes. They were not transitional places for you to drop in for a year, but really a place to live. And I like seeing that the south of downtown plan looks at how to rehab those buildings and also allow for other similar type structures to be built in there. So a little bit more density.
Yeah, when we've had projects come in front of the council before, especially talking about some of those core neighbors and in the city, you've done a really excellent job mediating some of those issues out between neighbors and developers, and I think that mediation is one of your strengths. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of neighborhoods and neighbors having a voice in what their city looks like and in what their neighborhoods look like?
Oh, well, James, I think that you're a really good example of that for the Northeast sector. People don't live in all of Lincoln. I mean, we may say we live in Lincoln, Nebraska, and put our zip code down, but really we live in our neighborhood. We live on our block. That's where people's life is often centered. And people need to feel like they have some involvement, some influence on their neighborhood, right? So that your neighbors are going to watch out for Your pets, your kids, they're gonna, if your trash can's left out too many days, they're gonna worry that maybe you're not doing well and they're gonna knock on your door or something like that. And so that's where we live in our neighborhoods. And I want people to feel like their neighborhood is also an extension of their home. It's where they can feel safe and secure. And oftentimes people get, first they get activated by wanting to do something in their neighborhood, plant trees, pick up trash, adopt the neighborhood park. The neighborhoods who have small libraries are very lucky because, kids grow up going, I can just walk to the library. Or if your neighborhood has a pool, one of the city pools, then you can, you feel safe letting your kids walk down the street to the pool because it's in your neighborhood. And, as we build newer neighborhoods, I want them to have the same kind of feel. I want them to feel like we're also a neighborhood within a small city, and both of them are accessible. So I think that neighborhoods are critical, just critical. If you feel safe in your neighborhood, then you're usually having a very good experience.
Do you think that the pandemic that we're currently experiencing has changed neighborhoods, or do you think that it's strengthened them or exposed some vulnerabilities of our city? Like, how do you think the pandemic has affected some of our neighborhoods?
Well, that's, well, for some neighborhoods, I must admit that I got to know my neighbors. I just moved about a year before the pandemic, and I did not know my neighbors as well when I moved. And we could have used the opportunity to not ever know each other. But we spent a lot of time yelling at each other from our driveways. We would sit, we'd sit there in lawn chairs, hey, and wave to each other. Hey. So, actually this summer was a pretty interesting social summer because we did visit along driveways. But I think some neighborhoods, sadly, they don't have the resources, and I think Lincoln in the last 20 years has gone from no blocks or census tracts of extreme poverty to a dozen census tracts of extreme poverty. And that's a lot in 20 years. None of those census tracts in 2000, maybe a half dozen in about 2010, and now a dozen, which means we have more poverty in Lincoln now than we've had. Housing in those areas tends to be maybe not as well kept up. The folks in those neighborhoods are probably essential workers. Either their jobs were cut if they're in the service industry, or if they worked in hospitals or in daycares or in grocery stores, they now become essential. And the homes aren't large enough for social distancing if someone gets sick. And so, what we've had in those neighborhoods is it's really exposed the vulnerabilities of those neighborhoods. You take folks who don't have a lot, they don't have choices. Their jobs did not become work at home, work from home jobs. And so they were out in the public doing necessary, important work. And those of us who could work from home, we had a certain amount of cushion there. And so, yes, I think that there's been a huge impact on those neighborhoods and those families. And I think you've seen it with the lines of food, the food lines, and certainly you are a friend of the Center of People in Need. And it was kind of overwhelming, not to the point where I was motionless, but it was really overwhelming to see the food lines there and in front of Lincoln High this summer and at the food bank. It was just amazing how many people were and still are in need because their hours have gone down, jobs have disappeared. Someone's gotten sick, and so they've had bills to pay.
Yeah, and as the pandemic has kind of put some economic stressors on families and has put families in a lot of positions that they might not have been before, one of the committees that we're both on is the Joint Budget Committee, which helps support nonprofits that are doing some of the frontline work. And you've always been a strong advocate for nonprofits in our community and helping families get their needs met. And so, would you mind talking a little bit about the Joint Budget Committee and some of the work that you've done on there, and some of the good work that some of the nonprofits in our city are doing?
I will. And James, here I need you to step up too, because you chair the Joint Budget Committee on Juvenile Services. And so, the Juvenile Services Committee is I'm so glad to serve on that because they do good work. We had applications from dozens and dozens, probably 50 applications last spring, and some are for small grants, medium-sized grants to help different organizations provide services, whether or not it was one of the cultural centers trying to put together a program for helping new Americans, new immigrants and refugees settle into Lincoln, or programs to help move children out of the justice system, out of the criminal justice system, and into some other kinds of programs to help manage stress and tension and things like that. We had a number of new organizations come in and get grants, and I know this year the Malone Center was very successful in getting some grants, and they had been out of the cycle for a while. It was really good to see them come back in and get funded, and the Uditsi Center, I think, got funds.
Are there any areas that you feel like we should be investing more in our nonprofit community? Are there any barriers that you think the city should be investing in to help families meet their needs?
Oh, gosh. Well, let's just sort of walk through this. I mean, I think that our city has done a very good job in supporting the organizations who support residents, and we sadly still need to put attention toward food deserts. I think now that names the Community Action Program has done a great job in feeding people in the summer, and their produce trucks and their food delivery service has done a great job as a necessary service. So, putting attention toward that. Toward the food bank, Centerpoint and the services they provide for the homeless navigators that they have in downtown is great. I know Matt Talbot. I mean, we had a relationship with Matt Talbot. My daughter her school used to send groups of kids to cook at Matt Talbot and serve lunch. So that's how I became familiar with Matt Talbot. I think that the push and the support of early childhood, that makes a huge difference in a child's life. I mean, that's getting the child early and providing them really quality preschool daycare that sets them up to be successful in school. That's critical. One of the programs that I was talking with Director Pat Lopez, the health department, with probably a year and a half ago, before we were hit with this, was whether or not we could look at bringing back the mother and infant visits, that program, because that has really positive health benefits when we were able to get county nurses visiting new mothers, every new mother, and I know that was something that we just had to set aside for budget reasons, but I would really like to see that program picked up again. I'd like us to think about how we can be of service to support successful families from the moment a child is born until the moment, someone's life is at the end. I think we're going to need to think a little bit more creatively about how we prepare ourselves to be an aging community, even with the numbers of people moving into Lincoln and the immigrants and refugees building lives here. We are still an aging community, and we're going to have more senior citizens in the next 20 years than we have now. And I think that's going to shift how we think about the services we provide.
I know that you've always been a really strong supporter of childhood education, and I know that I'm trying to remember what it was called that we had worked on with making sure that after-school programs had funding that they needed.
Oh yeah, the CLC programs.
Yes.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about that and why that's a passionate area for you, and kind of how you see the role of CLCs in our city?
Well, I love the CLC programs because they recognize that education doesn't just stop at 3 o'clock or whatever the end of the school day is, that education can be informal. It can be, it can be like learning social interactions. It could be the chess club. So I have a young friend, and his parents said, if you wouldn't mind picking Charlie up, once a week, I said, yeah, and they said, pick him up at the CLC, and I said, I got this, and I would get there sometimes like 10 minutes ahead of when I normally would, and his face would fall, and I'd be like, Charlie, what's wrong? And he goes, chess club. And he was 7 years old, and he's like, but this is where I get to play chess. I'm learning chess, please. And I said, all right, I'm gonna go out in the hall, and I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna look at my phone for 15 minutes. Why don't you, play another half a game? But, his parents didn't play chess. He learned to play chess. I thought that was great. It's where he learned to do other things. I mean, the cooking, the social interaction, it was a great program. And I can't remember we were at the zoo one night. The CLC programs were all at the zoo to sort of celebrate CLCs. And I had not participated with a high school CLC before. And I was really impressed by the North Star CLC program. Those kids were invested. They were involved. They were the docents that night at the zoo for all the families, and they were serving dinner, and they were giving tours, and they were doing the raffle. Those kids were great. And I was really glad because they were, not only were they getting a chance to learn something new, they were getting leadership skills, and they were shadowing other folks in careers, and really showing themselves to be young adults getting ready to fly. And it was wonderful to see that.
Why do you think it's important for youth to have leadership opportunities and to develop those skills?
We all are going to grow up and do something else. And kids who have got leadership skills, who have got job skills, enter the world with more confidence. I think they tackle the world and the problems and the challenges with more confidence and more assurance, and so that they're ready to look at problems. I think when we support kids, when we give them the kinds of things that they need, not just basic education, but these extra experiences that give them chances to test their wings in something, to take a leadership role, to really understand what it means to be part of a team that's working. I mean, really not so much a team like though sports, and I love sports. Sports can really do that, but the collaborative effort of working on something together really helps young people as they enter into adulthood and go on to take on more responsibilities. I'm a huge proponent of youth leadership activities because I think it helps the child, I think it helps families, and I know it helps society.
Absolutely, yeah, because you mentioned, in the next 20 years, we're going to have a huge influx of seniors living in our city, and I think the statistic is by 2025, we're going to have more senior citizens than students in LPS. And that's going to change some dynamics in our city, yeah.
I'm part of that group. I'm just gonna say that. I'm part of that group. I'm not laughing because I'm not. I'm laughing because I am. Yeah.
And yeah, we got to make sure that the next generation has the skills that they need to take care of us when we get to that age.
Yes, it is important. It's important. And certainly, I think that folks who are moving into the status of senior citizen are more vibrant, more healthy than than we were in that group 30 years ago. So it's I just think that's going to change up how we think of services. I've been thinking a lot about this pandemic's made me think about landscape architecture and about our city streets and rights of way and the Haymarket, and we're thinking about food trucks and how to design public spaces, and I look at that and all I can think of is it possible for us to come up with designs like along O Street? We're going to redo parts of O Street, the sidewalks and the planters and things, but can we think of ways to create public space that allows us to congregate safely and intuitively, without us thinking about it, we give ourselves the kind of spacing we might need in the future if we have some other epidemic, but that it's attractive and it still feels like we're in close connection with someone. So how do we create outdoor spaces that allow us to feel connected and safe at the same time? And when I think about climate change, and my brain really does jump like this, I think about the fact that it's going to get a little warmer in the summer. We're going to have more rain in the spring and more rain in the fall, but we're going to have more days at 100 degrees. But we still want to be outside. And sometimes being outside is the safest. So how do we create places that we're also safe outside so we don't have to, so that we have more shade? So now, how do we create public space outdoors in urban areas, that we feel connected to each other, we're at a safe distance, we're not going to get overheated? All of those things, I think about all of those kinds of things a lot when I'm driving around and I'm walking around and I'm looking at, the width of sidewalks, and, it's what is interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about a changing climate a little bit. Do you want to share a little bit of thoughts on how climate change could impact Lincoln and some of the ways that we should prepare for that?
Well, I don't know that I'm going to talk about the ways that we should prepare, but right now I'm spending a lot of time just looking at the beginning of the climate change plan that we have that says this is what Lincoln will be like in the next 30 to 40 years. We're going to be 5 degrees warmer, in general, 4 to 5 degrees warmer. We're going to have bigger snow events in the winter. So we're in the middle of a continent, so we get extremes weathers when we sit in the middle of a continent. So can you imagine having the snow we just had every winter, like twice, 2 or 3 times a winter? That means that we may have to do other kinds of things to keep our community functioning. We're going to have more days at 100 degrees in the summer. So let's think about what that means for keeping ourselves cool, or the demand on our electric grid. What do we need to do to maintain more comfort for ourselves? And in between lots of snow in the winter and episodic events and big rains in the spring and fall, we're going to have summer droughts. So how do we protect our floodplains, the structures, the businesses, the homes we have in floodplains, not in the floodway, but in the floodplains, because we've allowed development in floodplains. So how do we protect the floodplains and people living there?
Do you want to explain what floodplains are,
Oh.
floodways are?
Okay, now I'm going to get science. So a floodway is a creek, a river, a culvert. So it's the part that people usually look at and go, oh, there's a creek. And if you were to look at a cross section of it, there'd be a dip down and people would go, oh yeah, I know where the creek is. But if you look at any of the creeks around town, you'll notice that not just where the water sits, but just above where the water sits, for most of the year, there's another area. So it's kind of flat. There's not usually a lot of trees there, but it may be, 5 times wider than the creek. It may be 100 times wider than the creek. That's a floodplain. So it's that first level of ground above the creek or the river. And that's natural purpose is to hold the water when the creek floods. And it's very good ground for agriculture, and it's flat, and so we've built on it. And if you're back a ways in the floodplain, maybe it doesn't, maybe you don't get the water every spring. And that's why we have levees along some of our creeks, our drainages. But we do allow for development in floodplains. And we had one on our desk 2 weeks ago.
So like with the climate changing and having an increase in floods and some harsher weather coming our way, do you think that that the city is looking forward to how to tackle some of those issues that we're going to be facing, or kind of what's your thought on like the state of the union of it, right? Like what's your thought of?
I am filled with hope. I do not feel worried at all about that. You know, Lincoln is full of people who are smart and creative and who think into the future. And so right now we are thinking into the future. We're trying to figure out how do we become the most resilient city we can be. We know that climate change is going to happen. So how do we prepare ourselves? And this is really about being prepared. I mean, the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts have a motto, be prepared. I'm doing this for former Mayor Colleen Sang, who was also a lifetime Girl Scout like myself. But the motto is be prepared. And it's like, so how do we prepare ourselves to withstand flooding, high temperatures, a community of 350,000 people, an aging population, all of those things? Well, we can do that with good planning and making smart decisions now. And we're in that process. The initial climate change action plan had 600 ideas, and I think that was whittled down from probably twice that many ideas. Like, oh, we could do these things. And there was 1,300, 1,500 items that we could do. And it got whittled down. And the plan that we have right now that's out in draft has a lot fewer. So now there's about 119, 120 ideas. And of those ideas, a number of them are things we're already doing. So we're just continuing in on those. And then there's, you know, a couple dozen new ideas. And I think if we look at each of those ideas and not feel like it's one large ball of twine that we're trying to untangle, but if you look at that and go, we can continue those. Those are already in progress. And these over here, they might take some more thinking. They may take certainly some detailed investigations, but we can move forward on those things. And really anything that we do that sets us up to be more resilient is the right thing to be doing. You know, and being resilient for climate change means that we're also going to be resilient economically. So our economies don't falter when things go awry. It means that if we get Platte River flooding, Missouri River flooding that affects our well fields, and we're at a position of having to be careful about how much water we use, or we're in the summertime and we've got a drought and they say you can't water your yard. All of the things that help us to prepare ourselves to deal with future weather disasters or climate will make us stronger and more resilient everywhere. So it may not be that we have to have water restrictions on watering our yards because we have slowly moved ourselves to drought-resistant grass. Not a absolutism, but over the course of the next 20 years, I'm certainly committed to doing drought-resistant grass. Drought-resistant grass also doesn't grow as long and doesn't need to be mowed every week.
Oh, nice.
So, you know, it'll be a commitment, and I might miss a little bit that bright bluegrass, but I can suffer this one and plant a different species.
So your message essentially is be prepared, be hopeful, and
Yep.
we can take it on.
We can take it on.
You also recently launched an initiative of your own. Do you want to talk a little bit about the initiative that you launched?
Yeah, last summer, after George Floyd was murdered, and people were understandably upset, and there were lots of Black Lives Matter protests, and I realized that there was a void there in understanding, and it's really easy for folks to divide themselves between, oh, that's not me, or I don't understand those people. And I just thought, what we need is for folks to sit down and talk about some of this stuff. When we divide ourselves into different groups and put up a barrier or a division between us, it does not help us to understand each other or to work with each other to solve big problems. We have big challenges, as we were talking about, that needs everyone's input. And if we're divided up by race and class, then we're not able to work with each other. And if we can't work together, then we may not be able to work. So I started a program called Together One Lincoln, just as a way to encourage conversation. TogetherOneLincoln.com, and so it's out there. People can go to the website. But on the website are really ways to help people have difficult, uncomfortable conversations. So not everybody is familiar or comfortable talking about race or differences or racism. And so there's some tips there for how to start the conversation, some questions to get you going, and then some ideas about some ground rules to set when you're having these conversations so that they stay in a conversational tone.
Way to use your mediation skills. I mean, I think that's just one of the things I really admire about you is your ability to mediate. I mean, I've seen it with different issues that have come up, and it's definitely one of your, now that Carl Eskridge, who was our mediator on the council, is gone, you've kind of stepped in to be a mediator. What do you think should be the next, what's the message that you want to give some of our neighbors in Lincoln about the direction that the city is heading? What's your overall message to our neighbors kind of about what the next 5, 10, 20 years could look like?
Wow. Well, I think that Lincoln is doing really good things. I think Lincoln is going to be, Lincoln is a really great place to raise a family. I think that there are great prospects in Lincoln in all kinds of industries for people to be successful. I think we're an attractive community for other companies and for other folks. Certainly during this pandemic, I've met 2 or 3 families who have moved from New York, Boston, DC, and a family from California who said, no, we wanted to come someplace that felt more approachable, was a little less hectic. For a couple of families, they had family members here in Lincoln, and they said, this seemed like a good enough place to land. And so I want us to still be a city where people feel connected. As I said at the beginning, I don't want Lincoln to sprawl out so large that the person who moves here, who lives at 90th and Holdridge, doesn't feel connected to the rest of the city. I want them to feel like they have a place in Lincoln, that they don't live in pseudo-Lincoln or New Lincoln, they live in Lincoln. So the kinds of services that we provide, the communities, the neighborhoods that are a little bit closer in, those are the services I want to make certain that we're able to provide to other neighborhoods.
How do you see your role as being a member of the council? How do you see yourself as a member on the city council as a way to get there? How can you effectively use your position on the city council to achieve that vision for Lincoln?
Well, I think my job is to look at all of the projects that come before us and to use an analytic eye on it. I think it's imperative that when people come before council that they are treated fairly and that everyone has the same amount of access to government and to council as anyone else. I think it's important that we have transparent processes so that people don't have to question or guess. You know, if I come before council and I bring a problem, a solution, an idea, whatever, is it clear that I'm going to be treated in the same way as someone else? I want it to be absolutely clear that we are a fair city, that we will make policy decisions that impact everyone equally. I want to make sure that we're clear communicators. I think that my role on council is to, as I said, to analyze, to be fair, to make sure that there's equitable decisions being made that doesn't put any undue harm on one community or one neighborhood. And probably the biggest thing is, as a council person, I'm there to listen. I do not know everything. I don't know everything, and the only way for me to know what's happening in other people's lives and other people's neighborhoods is to listen, and that's what I have to do.
What's been the most memorable thing over the past 2 years serving on the city council that you've experienced?
Last summer, all of the folks who were engaged in city council, I mean, it's been a long time, I think, since city council meetings were packed. We had a number of meetings that was standing room only. And regardless if they were there to protest something going on in the city, to protest us, or to protest each other, I was really impressed with how many people wanted to be engaged. They wanted to participate in local government, and that is wonderful. So I'll never forget that. That was memorable. Gosh, you know, I think that really sort of takes the cake, you know. The only other thing that I can think of is a project that I had with the Planning Commission that I just thought, wow. Again, it was the numbers of people who wanted to be engaged. And I think that's what really interests me. It's what excites me, is that when I see that citizens want to be involved, that they're not just, you know, tuned out, but they're really tuned in, and that's important to me.
I would agree with you. I think that citizens are becoming more and more engaged every day, it seems like, on a city level, which is great. I mean, more access to their elected officials and wanting more action to get their voice heard.
Yeah.
Is really how you create this robust system of creating a system of government that people want.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you're working on, or anything else that you'd like to share with folks that are tuning in and folks in Northeast Lincoln? Before you answer that, I'll give you 2 seconds to think about it. I'll throw something else out there. One of the benefits of having the council system that we have set up now is folks in Northeast Lincoln have me as their Northeast representative, but then they also have Sandra Washington as another one of their representatives. So folks in Lincoln kind of have 4 people that they can go to, I mean, with the at-large members. So
Yeah.
Folks in Northeast Lincoln are represented by me, but then also by you. So that's just, I wanted to throw that out there because, you know, I think that when we talk about at-large members, it's easy to say, oh, the district quadrant person is my person. But I mean, you're just as much of a representative in each of those quadrants.
I am, and it means, when I first got into the position, I thought that I had to talk to every district representative. If I got a letter from like District 1 or District 2, I thought, oh, I'm supposed to let them know that I'm going to answer this. And then I was told, no, you don't have to. Please don't copy us on everything that you do. And I thought, oh, right. I was sort of feeling like you owned your district. And then it was like, no, as an at-large, I actually do have the ability to just talk to anybody. And which means that I feel a responsibility to answer Sometimes I do a much better job than other times, but yeah, it is interesting for me to have a member at large seat because it gives me a chance to intentionally get lost all over town. And my daughter always says, "What are we doing? Do you know where you're going?" I go, "No, my goal today was to get lost in a new neighborhood." And she goes, "Really?" And I go, "Yep." So I know kind of where I am, but I'm just going to drive and get a little turned around. And then that's how I learn neighborhoods, is I just get a little lost.
That's a perfect way to do it. So are there any projects that you have coming up or anything that you're working on or anything that we might not have touched on yet that you want to share?
Well, I told you earlier about the Prairie Corridor that I've been involved in, and that's sort of corridor protection and a trail from Pioneers Park all the way out to the Spring Creek Audubon Prairie. And it's so beautiful, and that really touches my career. So I studied natural resources and I work for the national parks. And so that just feels good to be involved in stuff like that. And I want folks to, if you have a conservation mind at all, if you have a heart for conservation, to keep your eyes open. There's another project that is going to be announced here this spring that I'm very excited about. I'm working with the Lincoln Parks Foundation on it. And it's going to be wonderful. It's just going to be wonderful. And what I like about it is that it's going to allow us to do a lot of different things in Lincoln. It's on the surface, it looks like pure conservation, but not so deep down. There's an opportunity to sort of put a pin through a number of different issues and have everything get a positive lift. And so I'm excited about the opportunity to talk a little bit more about conservancy in general around Lincoln and how it can help us in managing floodplains and protecting families' homes and even creating greater carbon sinks to address climate change. So,
very cool.
Yeah, so anyway, that's forthcoming and that's very exciting.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your leadership, and thank you so much for coming on to the Northeast Citizens meeting. I really admire working with you, and I really respect your attention to detail and your mediation skills. So thank you so much for everything that you do for our city.
James, the same back. Your compassion and just enthusiasm for Northeast Lincoln is great. I've learned a lot from you. So thank you for advocating for people all the time.
Well, thank you so much. This has been our Northeast Citizens meeting.
I have some questions.
Oh, yeah.
Would that be okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
First of all, how do you prefer to be addressed?
It can be councilperson, councilwoman, or Sandra. It's all right.
Well, welcome aboard.
Thanks.
Second, have you, before it snowed, did you travel on North 59th between Madison and Huntington?
Can't say that I did. Before it's snowed, I'm going there in my mind. That's a road that needs some work done.
Okay, I'll give you till May,
Okay.
and I'll ask that again. I was wondering if there's some sort of enforcement for people keeping their sidewalks clear with the snow.
Yes. You can upload a complaint on Uplink to share a concern if a person doesn't have their sidewalk cleared. And I believe that they have 24 hours until after the snow's fallen.
The ordinance is that the sidewalks must be clear 24 hours after the snowfall has completed.
And does that apply to residential as well as businesses?
Yes, it does. And it's basically a complaint-driven system. Nobody drives around and cites people for an unclear sidewalk, but if someone complains about an unclear sidewalk, then a warning, usually something happens.
Okay. The other one was we haven't spoken about it recently, but there's a big project going on at North 33rd, Adams, and Cornhusker, and I was wondering how that's progressing.
The RTSD project. Yeah, are you on the,
Yeah.
you're on the RTSD board.
Yeah, so there's going to be some open houses and some more information that's going to be coming out as the committee did an environmental scan. That information is on, I believe the website's like 33rd and Cornhusker.com, and I believe that they're going to be doing some open houses, well, virtual open houses in June or July.
Of this year.
Correct.
Do you have influence on whether teachers get inoculated or shots for the vaccine before other people?
So the system right now is that 10% of the vaccines that are coming in can be set aside for essential workers. And there's a priority list that is being worked through. And right now, I believe that phase 1B is with first responders.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
With first responders, like police officers. I know that yesterday the mayor and the health director said that teachers would be up in about 3 weeks with the amount of vaccines that we're receiving. So teachers should be getting vaccinated during spring break.
You mentioned narrow streets. I was curious why we have an exit for North 27 on Interstate 80, and it's 4 lanes at, what is that, Highway 2. Why does it funnel down to 2 lanes and a turning lane in the middle between South Street and Highway 2?
That's a really good question. I didn't live in Lincoln when they tried to widen 27th Street, but I have heard about it a lot. So yes, so North 27th Street does this thing all the way down. It's wide, it's narrow, it's wide, it's narrow. But in that section, well, it's the widest up at the Interstate 80, and then it comes down to, as you're coming through from Cornhusker to O to Normal to South Street, it gets a little more narrow between Normal and South Street. You don't have the center turn lane. But through the Country Club neighborhood, and they have fought it, the widening of it. And I don't know if that will ever get, to do that, they would need to actually buy out some property. The city would probably need to buy some property.
So?
That
was a question mark on the end of that.
Yeah. But I can't tell you why the city hasn't forced it. But I know that the neighborhood has fought it in the past. I don't know if there's a proposal any longer to widen 27th there.
You want to weigh in on this?
No, I don't know the history behind it, but I'd be more than happy to take your question and then ask Liz Elliott, who's our Director of Transportation, to get some historical context and to figure out what solutions we might be looking for.
Yeah.
We had, she was on our show probably about 2 months ago, and she's really good at knowing and finding out solutions and finding out answers to some of that historical stuff. So I'll be more than happy to take your question and ask her and get some information for you.
Yeah. And the planning department, I was thinking of Steve Henriksen.
Yeah.
Steve Henriksen in the planning department will have the history in his head. And he'll be right there at his, right there.
Let's see. Oh, we now have a ban, how do you put it? How do we put it? Cardboard needs to be separated from regular trash, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there some sort of way to enforce that?
It's a voluntary program. I don't know if there is a way to enforce it with residences. I mean, we're encouraged. Businesses, large businesses already flatten their cardboard. That was just a business practice so that their dumpsters didn't get over full quickly. And so I think businesses have a financial desire to do that. But I don't believe that the city right now is looking at how to actively regulate cardboard.
One thing I will say is that after the cardboard ban went into effect, there was a drop of, I don't know how many thousands of pounds of waste that was diverted from our landfill. And so I can give you the specific numbers on that, but it showed that folks were following the cardboard ban and was extending the life of our landfill, which is in North Lincoln.
Yeah, it's very successful.
My question is, how is it enforced?
Well, I think that I think building and safety has some mechanisms that they don't go up and down streets and roads to make sure that cardboard is not in people's trash cans. But I think a lot of that enforcement comes from some of the recycling centers and from businesses in particular. So, you know, no one's driving up and down through the alleyways of Lincoln, but I can get you some information on kind of the consequences of it and how many citations have been written, if any, and give you some information about how much trash had been diverted from the landfill, which to me wasn't an insignificant amount. That showed that folks have been following it.
Will you do that before or after you drive on North 59 between Madison and Havelock?
I'll send out an email before we leave here today.
I should apologize. It's a pet peeve of mine that we've gone through Cindy, who was the predecessor before her?
Doug.
Emery.
Okay.
And now I'm harping at him on it still. So.
Okay, I'm going to drive 59th. I am. Is it clear to pavement right now?
I'm sorry. What?
Is it clear to pavement?
No, it's covered in snow. That's why I said I'll wait till May.
Okay, all right. Okay.
And I'll wait till May. I'll give you till May. All three of these. Let me just see.
Let's hope the snow goes away before May.
Yeah. Well, we're at 6:30. I'll be happy to chat with you after this, but we're at 6:30, but we can definitely hang out after this. But,
Sure.
But again, my name is James Michael Bowers. I am the Northeast City Council rep. I wanted to thank Councilwoman Sandra Washington for joining us, and we'll see you again the next third Thursday of the month in March, where we will have former City Council person and former State Senator Ken Haar joining us. Thank you so much.
Great.